credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Vitruvian Podcast, a podcast centered around self-mastery. I'm your host, Zach Shankin. Today, I am joined by Fury. Fury is best known for his philosophical and cosmological takes, running the Twitter account HOOAFury, but that is just the side that we are privileged to see. Fury has lived a life of stories to tell, and his perspective on life and the world has been earned in the field. A true Renaissance man in the classical sense, Fury is a polyglot, engineer, vagabond, and adventurer. And I'm excited for our conversation today. Fury, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks, man. I'm honored to be on the show. Yeah, from the bat, I'm really struck by the Vitruvian Man. I was raised with classics like ancient Greek and Latin, so I'm really stoked to join the show, and I'm ready to roll, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we certainly share the inspiration from that period of history. I think there is something, obviously we're seeing a bit of a trend with those sort of aesthetics popping back up, but I think there is something somewhat timeless about that era, the kind of human masculine form, and then certainly Leonardo specifically being a very big inspiration for myself. I can get into kind of, and I've talked about on previous episodes of this show about kind of how and where that has come into my life, but Leonardo being not well defined by one word, right? He was not only a fine artist, but also an inventor, an anatomist, a botanist. Some people think a time traveler. So certainly a very interesting character. And I always took or felt kindred in some sense because I never fit well into one box. I liked studying philosophy as much as, high level mathematics. I ended up studying engineering just because you have to kind of choose something at university, or certainly they ask you to. But it was a hard decision for me to kind of silo myself. And then now with the work that I do, getting to be much more expansive and a kind of a broader version of myself has been very fulfilling. And I think I want to do an early shout out for our connection being a mutual friend, Ryan. And I was in preparation for this episode, I was listening to your guys' second podcast together, and it was really, really excellent. And I'm excited to see kind of where this conversation goes.
Yeah, me as well. Didn't know that Leonardo was a time traveler. Maybe saw it in some cartoon or something like that, but that's some good stuff, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think history is very much up for debate. There's that famous quote, like, if the news is fake, imagine history. So I think at some level, it can be a bit of a pointless rabbit hole to go down, but I do think it's fun to consider the somewhat limitless possibilities of the shared history that we all have together. I typically like to start off this story or this podcast with asking people, we talked on the phone a little bit about the podcast being surrounded about self-mastery. And I think everyone finds their way to this world of, call it self-actualization, self-development, self-mastery, in a unique path. And that path informs the man that sits before me today. So I do want to hear a little bit about how you kind of entered that world. What was that was it a first book, a person, maybe a specific life event that really set you on the path that you find yourself on today?
Yeah. So you know how these days you have Netflix, for example? Back in the olden days, those streaming outlets didn't exist, and you had to acquire certain stuff via illustrious methods. And what was really interesting, these people providing these packets always provided a plethora of packets that were so not per se esoteric, but was all over the place. And it wasn't, for example, let's say you would acquire a PUA, a pickup artist bundle. Like you would get for example, social dynamics, cold approaches, some pickup lines, something like that. But then also incorporated would be As a Man Thinketh suddenly would be there, by James Allen, or you'd get really philosophical stuff, and it was all over the place. It was basically you couldn't pin it down, and as a young man, I was like a sponge, and that basically opened me up for all kinds of rabbit holes. Because, for example, if you're doing game, you need to learn outer game, but then you realize you need to do inner game, and then you start to think about the self. then you start to think about, like the pursuit of the self. What is the self? Psyche, philosophy, your mentality, mindset, for example, meditation. Or it could be like these days, a lot of people adhere to their Abrahamic religions, back to their roots. And you're thinking, what is inner game? And there you're going to try to piece everything together. And for me, that was the catalyst for the rabbit hole of I was doing whatever the hell I wanted. One moment I was reading what I just mentioned, and next moment I was reading Sun Tzu. I was never really interested in that per se, but it set me on that path to quote unquote train everything and more so read everything. I was more like an intellectual, so I didn't like to train. These days, I'm quite lethargic as well, but I like to read more and just give me anything that's a little bit stimulating. I'll read it. I'll put it down maybe, but I'll find something in it that will be like a node in the vast repository of what is given to me.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I think there is somewhat of a common thread where it tends to be some sort of external force, whether it's kind of an insecurity about body. Like for myself, growing up in sports, but being kind of a chubbier kid, it was like I just wanted to look like an athlete, like the other kids in the locker room, not be insecure. So it starts very peripheral. You search like how to get abs on YouTube, and then that really opens up this crazy rabbit hole because training goes to nutrition goes to biochemistry in the cells, and then quickly you discover that there's also this world of mental components, and like you alluded to, there's this ever unfolding unconscious world. And again, I was somewhat similar, where I identified when I was young my kind of weapon, or the thing that I clung to, was the intellect. It was something that I was naturally stronger with, so I used that as my outer shell before the kind of physique caught up to match. And yeah, I was diving into all the great men of history, like we kind of started this conversation, finding those inspirational stories. And then I don't know, it just continues to be this limitless pursuit. And I love exploring just the natural curiosity. And I like the way you kind of described it with a node, because it does become this like wild neural network, and you kind of each new quote, mental model, book, essay, whatever it may be, is just a new point. And then your brain does the work to connect it to this big web, and it's just adding tools to the toolbox.
Yeah, definitely. And it ties back like I wouldn't label it like as my personal philosophy, but I always believed in some kind of artisanal, limitless expression. You can't box a human being in. Your name might be this, my name might be that, but you as a human being, like I think, well, I'm not a parent, so you can't speak of that. But I think, like, in terms of parenting style, they should really cater that they make their child, or like at least give them a nudge in to be fully free. And if you choose a spouse, for example, or just a girlfriend, you should choose somebody who accepts you for your full all-encompassing freedom, because well, you're gonna want to do this one day, but next day you might have a different whim. And that's, in my honest opinion, how a human should be, and you must do upon others as you'd like to do upon yourself.
I completely agree. And as someone who personally aspires to one day have a family, I think about that as a concept kind of all the time. And what is the responsibility of a father leading a family? How much control do you have on or over the person that your child, son or daughter, ends up becoming? The data seems somewhat unclear. Maybe it's like 50-50, 50% is just raw genetic material and whoever they end up being. And then 50 is the kind of frameworks, values, moral systems that you hopefully can engender at an early age. But I do agree that, I don't know, the relationship thing is complicated. It's hard enough to self-actualize. And then you think about bringing an entire other person and just 2xing that problem, and potentially even more than a 2x on the complication of kind of integrating a fully actualized person into your life and hopefully growing in the same direction. It's a really big problem.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you said that 2x, like, because like self-actualizing could be like one formula for one human being, and then the second, and then you have a nuclear family, goes all over the place. And in that sense, in terms of esotericism, one of the masculine tenets, quote unquote masculine, is order. More entropic is usually in esotericism more feminine, and that's why as a dude you have to have unlocked some form of discipline in one domain at least. It's okay to have a divergent style of thinking. I say that to all my artist friends. That's fine. But one day you're gonna have to provide, protect, and build, and usually that aligns with some form of linear style thought, convergence, focus. What you can label as masculinity, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. And how much do you subscribe to the binary structure of masculine and feminine? Because you kind of said quote unquote masculine, and I definitely, personally, I think that it is a helpful framework to view not only men and women, but like as David Data kind of talks about, everyone having their own internal balance of energies. Do you think that that's a useful or maybe even accurate framework?
Yeah, I think, like as I gotten older and more accustomed to social dynamics, you can't really ever replace small talk, right? If you just get to learn somebody at a cafe or whatever, small talk is necessary. You'll make a comment about the weather, sounds dumb, but you pour in your energy and then you shift into, for example, last week I was in Spain, and then you go deeper. I feel like a tangent or like an analogy, the same way I would approach, for example, polarizing questions and conversation. These days you have to tiptoe with certain people who are very political, or they want to cancel you, or they're very uptight. Let's not give them names, but they're very uptight and want to be quite belligerent fast. And you can test it out a little bit. It's like a tool or like a trump card that you can utilize to see where they stand and broach the subject in that. For example, some people are allergic to the gym, for example. So what you can do, you can play with that. For example, you say it's very masculine to train. See how they respond to that. It's almost like a fishing net. You see if there's like a tug or something, and from there you can build upon. It's not something that I don't believe that only guys have to go to the gym per se, but you can say softly and quite, like timidly, like, what do you think about this? And then you can get the conversation, the ball a little bit rolling.
Definitely. I think that's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it like that, as almost like a tool for conversation or a tool for framing, connecting with another person and their worldview. But I definitely think that, yeah, whether fortunately or unfortunately, we live in a world where tactfulness is required when talking about stuff like that, because we seem to be in a reality that is more and more divorced from reality, and it's just like this upside down world where everything is kind of subverted. So it's interesting to bring in things that are binary or more tied towards the biological, which for whatever reason has now become somewhat, I suppose, for like political almost, where it's like things should just be measured objectively. We should be able to kind of look at it as a thing and just discuss it as a topic, but then it becomes kind of this like dogmatically infused religious problem.
Yeah, definitely. And to tie it into that, it's not as if, for example, I know in some states in the US you can just like buy firearms, right? You got like the Second Amendment, right? And for example, I'm not currently dating, like, for example, an American woman, but I grew up like with Hollywood movies, so I'd actually find it very interesting and fascinating if a woman actually is really good shot. It's not something masculine, but I just find it interesting. And I'm not a good shot at all because it's not cultural here where I'm from. It's very fascinating to talk about that, like, that kind of culture that is more American instead of something gender oriented or something. So good.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And it brings up a point that I was actually thinking about on a walk yesterday, which is that life becomes and people are most interesting in contrast, in like periods of really, really strong contrast. If we kind of float towards the middle where everything's not too offensive one way or the other, or even your life experience is just okay, you live in kind of this like middle malaise, where things can be, I don't know, like just not too bad or not too good. But I find myself extremely averse to that sort of feeling. And I honestly think that you have to live in these kind of endpoints of experience, whether take like material wealth, like it's much more interesting as a story, and quite frankly just as a felt experience, to be completely abject poverty or super super wealthy, but like floating somewhere in the middle and never really experiencing those two endpoints. And it doesn't mean like your bank account has to directly reflect it, but pushing yourself to the edge and visiting places that force you to have those kind of carnal experiences, and then also going towards the totally posh and high end. I don't know. I think life is, and people are very interesting in the contrast. So like you were kind of alluding to.
Yeah, no, Zach, like I really love your diction, like your lexicon, how you are able to describe that in your own words, and definitely like semantically what you described. I've experienced that. For example, I think a lot of my friends have that, like they house that quality of living in the contrast, or being living paradoxes. For example, well, he isn't my best friend, but one of the friends I like the best, I would say he's one of the more successful guys that I know. But the first time I met him, he was almost like a ninja, and he wanted to meet in the most dodgiest club of his city. And it was so striking because I don't know if he did it on purpose, but he frequents that place a lot, so it says a lot. So he comes from a more posh background, either from elitist or he comes from money. I don't know actually, but I met him in the most stupid bar that I wouldn't frequent that often just by my own devices, but I would choose it for why he would do it actually, like in terms of personality, just for the whim, just for experience, and just what kind of people are you going to meet there. And in that sense, you're being a living paradox. You think you're posh, you need to go to some kind of high establishment or something, but you're just chilling there, quote unquote, with the masses, see how that synergy flows, or what that kinetic energy is when you're conversing with other people, or just being there, because you can feel the energy of all these different people. And in that sense, your state of mind and being, you'll learn something from that. Even me sharing this about him, or the story that I picked up my younger self, that was more like, you could say, like an anxious style personality, stuff like that. I would have never dared to dream to have those pockets of like mentality open up for me. So in that sense, I like that, in terms of fostering and growing your personality and seeing what the world has to offer.
Definitely. And that is one thing I want to kind of hear more expanded on, because in that second podcast with Ryan, you kind of alluded to being that younger man and really just like craving, whether you call it like the call to action, call to adventure, the hero's journey, but like wanting to just push the boundaries, and at no expense. I mean, I think we have the benefit as men of being just like wildly resilient creatures, both like mental fortitude and just physically. Like we can take a ton of abuse and still bounce back. So I want to hear kind of when you were a younger man and you were seeking out some of those more wild experiences, do you think it was entirely conscious? Like, were you really seeking those out knowing that like, okay, this is going to change me into X, Y, and Z, this is going to push me out of my comfort zone? Or was it more somewhat reckless abandon?
I think it's a combination of both, to choose the third option. It ties a little bit back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, you asked me, like, how did I go down that rabbit hole of train everything? Is that once I don't do that, for example, we talked about it in our introductory call about, let's say you're choosing a service on Twitter or any social media platform, and you're the kind of guy, or one is the kind of guy that you put in your bio, I'm going to help you with copywriting and boost you to $50 million in 30 days. It's perfectly fine to specialize in terms of a skill. It's effective, for monetization. But I felt always, if I did that in any tenet, any realm, domain of life, I would feel like a very gut-wrenching feeling within my soul. I'd feel some kind of stagnation, and it's really hard to pinpoint because it's an amalgam of different feelings. That's really like it's an atrocious feeling. Like it's suffocating, and it feels close to like depression. So when you look up like bipolar disorder, you have the ups and downs. The ups is usually the mania when you're winning. So it could be you're balling with dating, or you're making shit ton of money, or whatever. But the downside is like is heavy, And once I was experiencing that was usually when I was stuck, was stuck in form of physicality. I wasn't training enough, or I wasn't running a marathon before that. It was before this. I wasn't dating. I wasn't traveling. I wasn't doing anything. And in that stagnation, I feel that I need to do something. And usually that is the call to action. So it would be by the subversion, the inversion of the call to action. I feel something that is not the call to action. Basically, it's almost like, because we're living in this spiritual malaise, like I'm feeling like a symptom or like a signal that the signal is not coming. And once it's not there, you have to quote unquote create your own rite of passage, and you have to create your own spiritual initiations. And within that massive, like almost like apocalyptic, end reality of sometimes that I feel that we're in, the options are quite vast. And within that, I feel some kind of, well, that is the call to action, but also some kind of passion. And there it starts going. And then you're back on the roller coaster again, and the mania takes over again. And then you go into the other phases of like the monomyth of Campbell. After the call to action, you meet the other ones, and there the ball kind of starts to get rolling again. And once you take a L there, take a loss there, then it's kind of fine, because you've seen that monomyth or that mental framework in action as how life can be viewed through that lens. And then you'll think, okay, maybe I can regroup now and do this later. And you have a more like campaign warfare military mindset as a man in the war of your life.
I agree. And I think honestly, I mean, it can be definitely playing devil's advocate or the role of the audience member. Like, it can be hard to picture if you're just like going to a 9 to 5, you have like a pretty normal, quote unquote, normal life. But I think it's helpful to consider that even if it is just a form of perspective or a mental model, it just makes life far more compelling to view yourself on some sort of heroic mission. There's like that famous clip that went crazy of Joe Rogan a number of years ago. He's like, "This is your life. Picture a film crew, and like this is the beginning of your movie, and you're a loser, and you got to turn it around." And I think that is like a helpful model, like wherever you are, whether you're further down the line, you've started multiple businesses, you're quote unquote externally successful, or you're just becoming curious about self-mastery. You found this podcast for the first time, you follow HOOA on Twitter, and you're kind of like curious about this world. Every day is in of itself a bit of like a rebirth and a restart. So if today is your day one, what would it look like to completely alter the trajectory of your life? Like if you're the hero and you have to save, well, ultimately yourself, but like the world or whatever it forms for you, maybe it's your family, maybe whatever, just having it as a mental model, even if you don't believe in the concept of the monomyth or like your life is a hero's journey or reality is even framed that way. And I do like that you said that you have to form your own call to adventure, because I would argue that all of these ancient frameworks and mythological kind of archetypal stories are the story of the self, like somewhat Jungian in that sense. And I would argue that like the call to adventure on the individual sense, like individual felt experience, is always going to be self-driven. Like no one is actually going to knock on your door and say like, it is time for you to go do this heroic mission. That's what we have stories for. That's what we have movies and TV and previously, books and folk tales. But all of those are stories to help us understand our own internal experience, because I think that malaise or that sense of wandering or lostness is consistent throughout time and history. And we see it in the journals and the writings of people long dead and gone, as well as the, vlogs of YouTube today. People of all ages, like everybody gets to a place where they're like, well, why the fuck am I here? Like, what am I doing? Why am I wandering around in this world? Like, what am I even here to do and share? And so the call to adventure is almost, in my opinion, always internal.
I like that, that it's experiential, it's about the self. And, tying into that, like these days, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but what I see is that people are quite into fast, instant dopamine gratification and hedonistic adaptation. We all want it now, quick wins. And usually that's about entertainment, and we all watch Netflix show or movies, whatever. It's about entertainment. And I always ask a reader, or I get a reader question, or I'm just talking with my friends, like, these things that you're watching it for entertainment. Why are they the hero? Why are they the main character? And why should their life story or their story that you're watching so be entertaining? Why is your life not the it show that somebody else can see or partake in? You can take everybody on your ride if you have the abundance or the energy, whatever. And it's all about entertainment, because I never wanted my life to be boring. And the things I've done, I'm proud of that, in terms that I can say, well, it wasn't boring, it wasn't the best. I took some L's as well. You can accept that, you can integrate that. But some things, if I share it, like I said, like if I write it down, sometimes I wouldn't believe it myself. If I juxtapose it or contrast it with each other, it seems almost made up, but I made it up. And that was my will to power, or like a master morale to create something that is a storybook. And I didn't, when I was younger, didn't know per se that I wanted to have kids. But as I get older, I'm thinking, well, this is a cool story to tell the kids and the grandkids. And then they have their own shared genealogical, like personal myth within the family, like this and this and this. And maybe they'll get inspiration from that, inspire, educate, and entertain. And that tethers you more, that roots you more, in terms of like teleological beings, that we all humans need some kind of purpose, some kind of mission. And that is under the umbrella of some kind of story. Stripped away from philosophy or whatever, it's always some kind of story. And in the most successful people, their lives will always have a story of a famous grandpa or successful uncle. There's always some kind of main character or something. And usually, like, the guys, like, I'm assuming I'm gonna be like younger men listening to this, like, you're the it, you're the guy. It doesn't matter if you're not the next, I don't know, Napoleon or Alexander. That's very like 0.1%. That's accepting your archetypal completion as well, alignment and stuff like that. We can't all be King Arthur. Some of my friends, they even look like, very Aryan, very Caucasian, and maybe they're King Arthur, but you're destined to find out what your puzzle pieces are. And those puzzle pieces, usually, like you said, will come in the form of some externality that you're seeing. Hey, maybe I need to go get into shape. And even, like, even if you're running a 9 to 5 or something, why not go really hard at the gym? Some guys do that really well. They have like sufficient funds because of their stability, and they just get to be able to go to the gym like at least 3 to 4 times a week, and they get really well in shape. And through that intensity, you get some kind of transcendental energy, and then they start thinking new shit. Why am I in this job? Let me do this and this, and it just compounds on that.
I completely agree. And there's a few things I want to touch on in that. First is that, this is like the very nature of the work that I do in my program is, helping people, as I deem it, find their Achilles advantage. Like Achilles, this fabled fighter of old, was extremely potent because of his self-awareness. He knew exactly his one weakness as well as his strengths. So it allowed him to be perfectly positioned. And I think in this world of personal branding, internet money, but even if you are just in a 9 to 5, having a acute level of self-awareness of not only your strengths, but what are your weaknesses and where do you double down, where do you position yourself so that you're not vulnerable. It's very empowering. And like, if you can have that mission statement, that one-liner for yourself or to share with the world that like, I'm here to give this gift to the world, it's extremely empowering and emboldening for, a sense of inner confidence, which obviously exudes into the external. And then secondarily, you were saying, like becoming the archetypal hero. I mean, again, I think all of these stories and frameworks are externalities that are hopefully having us or incentivizing us or spurring us to take that inward look. And the truth of the matter is, every one of us is Napoleon, is Alexander, because you are only here tied to this physical experience currently. So you have to exact the maximum of this avatar's capabilities in this realm. You were born in it, wherever you were. Your name is whatever you were given. Your genetic components, your race, all of it. Like, these are the player characteristics that are immutable. The rest of it is up to your choice and your perspective that you take on. And then the kind of quote unquote risks or left field turns or crazy adventures you choose to take or not take. And I think that, Ryan brought this up. It's like the cost of inaction outweighing the cost of action. because you can definitely take these quote unquote risks and take L's, as you alluded to, whether it's approaching a girl and getting turned down or starting a business and losing everything you have. But on the flip side of that coin is that you don't ask. And then for the rest of your life, you have to wonder, could that have been my wife? Or could I have succeeded in that business? I think that the finality of the answer, even if it's a no, is way better than the unknowing and the wonder, because it is just like you kind of said at the beginning, like a malaise, or like regret isn't the right word, but it's a pain that you can't undo.
Yeah, definitely. I think I know what you mean. I have that as well, often a lot, that I'm trying to describe something and it's not regret, but it's more so like tied to, I think it's attributed to Plato or something, you know, if a man is never tested in his whole life, you know, and if a man never finalizes complete physique or something like that, it has to do with, yeah, your full potential. And this is, I think, also quite gender neutral in the sense that people just want to max out, you know, and like what ifs. And people don't like what ifs because it's like a loose threads. And loose threads are massive, like cortical spikes. If like people listening like copywriting, you have like hooks and leads and stuff like that. They do these open loops. If the open loop doesn't close, it's like this massive cortical spike in your head that's extremely annoying. Just imagine all the freaking open loops you have in your life open loops. And if you don't close them, it's quite agonizing. I have some like open loops that have been going on for years. And once I like finally close one of them, and that's like years old, it's like a nice little solace. You know, you don't get anything in terms of something material per se, but it's like, okay, that chapter's closed. I knew why the reason was, or I'm suspecting that. I'll chalk it up to this. I'll box it in like this. It's done. It's clear, and the narrative can go on. You know, and people need that because, well, you can't be in stress 24/7 the whole time.
Oh, and this is what I wanted to circle back to, is you were talking about how you find that people's attention spans are very short today because they're trying to find that next piece of entertainment. I would argue, and this is just like an inference based on what I've kind of read and experienced through what has been purported to me as history, is that that's more of a human condition. We've always struggled with the same issue. We just have way more outlets and way more companies and external, I guess, vehicles vying for that attention. I think we've kind of always struggled with the same types of issues, whether it's hedonism or lust or whatever, these kind of like vices that are unanimously human. We just have a bunch of different vehicles for it. And now we have a supercomputer in our pocket that's constantly banging on that wall. And talking about open loops, like every new short 60-second video is another thought loop that gets open in your head. Sometimes it closes by the end of it. Sometimes it's it's a funnel for some sort of business, which you need to click to the next thing and the next thing. And then you find yourself at a sales page, but whatever it may be. I mean, I think our brains are definitely maybe not overstimulated. We're still around, but it definitely, I think it's like we live high cortisol lives and it's pushing us in a way that maybe the human animal hasn't had to deal with in the past, which we seem to be adapting for fine. But I think minimizing that stimulus and then realistically, not even minimizing, but just like intentionally choosing how we open those loops. Like a book is a great example. Like you open the thought loop on the first page, you work your way through it for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and then you get to the end of the story and it's closed, but you actually like earn the dopamine through the process, and it's not just kind of like arbitrary and instantaneous and then almost addictive.
Yeah, to stay on brand, that's why I've been reading more. It's more satiating. The dopamine you get is like it's like in a longer dosage. If you were to make an XY graph or something like that, or somebody were to do an fMRI scan whilst I'm reading the book, it's more satiating over the period. I do tend to read faster now these days as well, but what you get, it's more soothing, more calming, more like serotonin or oxytocin. So I like to, how do you say, like track my own my experiences. So something's more fast paced, like a drink, I tend to describe with my own words how that feels like. And if you're reading a book, it feels definitely different, and you change your mind to try to focus on your projects more and more. And coming back, I think like also with like inboxes that gets flooded, you know, as an analogy to what we just described, it's like this ever ever-growing hydra, like from the story of Hercules, the 12 labors. You have like the hydra he has to kill. If you chop off one head, more come, and that's akin to all these TikTok shorts and all these emails that just keep coming. And at one point, you just have to sever the head and just never look back, or else the hydra is just going to keep spawning.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. What are some of the things that in your life you kind of alluded to, opening and closing bigger loops? Like, what are you working on now that is your current iteration of your hero's journey? Like, what is the big project that you're kind of trying to chop at right now?
Yeah, so I'm working on the course, the latest saga, working with prospects and clients in terms of like writing, authentic writing, trying to make them better, make them share their stories more, almost like effective and efficient and more from the heart. Because I see a lot of, I think this has to do with the digital age and Chat GPT and stuff like that, and it becomes still really fast, even for myself. So I had a chat with a couple of my friends after like a travel, and they said, focus on that. So I'm trying to help people with that and see where they can. These days also, what you said, like Zach, like tying it back to because of choice overload, we get to choose our own tribes or clans, and that is cool as well. That wasn't maybe possible back in the day, and now I'm trying to help people with that because it does help in terms of like a stabilizing order, like from a microcosm in a miniature. From there, we try to help society on a macrocosm. I wouldn't say I'm the most philanthropical guy, but I do believe it's a more value for society in the long run. Like imagine I'm working with one writer and he works with two, and then you get like this like nodal network of writers, and it does tend to get better that way. And you help the man in the mirror, and slowly you try to push a narrative for the better. And I try to tiptoe the line in terms of what my mimetics are, not trying to push that too much, but steer away from too much hedonism and degeneracy, but focus more on, for example, travel experiences, adventure, also like self-mastery and stuff like that, or learning more languages. People know I learned that, and like that I'm well versed in like in the classics, and basically I'm very well read, and I want all my readers to have that quality at least, and then you can cherry pick and like zone in and create like this denser own personal narrative, own personal clan. I truly see that a lot of people have that potential, and they're just waiting to explode outside of their cup. I know their cup is full, but they're just waiting for it to pour out, and everybody needs a little bit like a tip, like a push over the ledge, like push over the cliff, and then everything gets flooded.
Yeah, I really love that. And I feel very similar. I spent a good amount of my time up until I entered kind of the public arena, feeling that kind of similar sense, pouring into myself, doing the work. And then you get to the place where the cup is full and it starts to overflow, and you do get filled with this sense like, okay, who can I help with this? I see all this potential in all these other people. Maybe they just need that little bit of delusional confidence. And for those of us that enter the arena kind of voluntarily because of, call it ego, call it arrogance, call it delusional optimism, whatever it may be, I think the onus falls on the brave among us, which is not to be like self-aggrandizing, but it's just you're taking uncommon action. And for those that have the internal impetus to do it, I think our duty therefore is to like help give other people that little push, like you said. I am curious, do you believe in the concept of altruism? Like, do you think it's possible to be truly philanthropic?
Oh, what I really like about that, one of my friends, he talks about it a lot, and I'm paraphrasing it here, that I adhere to most, is that true altruism starts with taking care of yourself. What I found is that the people who are the most altruistic are actually the most successful, and they have the capacity to share something. It could be they're brimming with energy, or they have a lot of funds. They have something in space. They have one, like RPG game. One of the stats is fully maxed out, and because of the capacity that they have something, and then the awareness they have it, and it is only then and only then that they're altruistic. One of my first bosses that I worked with, she's super altruistic, but it's only because she worked in the brick and mortar business for like 40 years, like 4 decades. And one of my uncles and a couple of my friends, they're only altruistic because they have so much to share, you know? They're on the back end of their journey, and they enter like almost like a sage archetype, like a Merlin archetype, or Aristotle to Alexander. They know that they are kind of set, that they don't really have anything to prove anymore. They always have some kind of chip on their shoulder because of their own journey. They have a certain strength and aura and whatever, but they're not out there to find the new dragon anymore. It's almost as if they're waiting to pass the mantle, they're waiting to pass the baton, or in the final part of the Odyssey, they're waiting. They're like Odysseus at the end, and they're waiting to pass the oar and go back into the forest and give it back to the people. And it's only in that sense that you can be truly altruistic. And I've noticed that you have to be a certain personality. For example, tying back to what you just said, like what kind of like big personal open loops am I working on? I've noticed once I start to, for example, put out like you create like a hype campaign for yo, I'm gonna put out this course, I'm opening up slots for the next cohort. People see you're cooking something, and they see that there's an abundance. It's like a maelstrom of energy, and it's very human, very instinctual and reflexive that my DMs open up, but not always of people who are how do you say, they're not adding to the altruism, they're not adding to the abundance, they're just seeing this guy is spiking from energy. And sometimes it's implicit, what I call like a subconscious style crabs in a bucket, because they know you're going to break the strata and they want to hold you back. Sometimes it's actually in their way that they want to be taken along for the ride, and then it gets kind of like hazy. You know, what was the relationship? Because you're growing, are they growing as well? Can they come along for the ride? And in that sense, it's quite fascinating. How can you be altruistic then? Because sometimes people are not coming along for the ride, and it takes a big self-awareness and a big style of like self-confidence, but at the same time nobility. So it's like tiptoeing a lots of different lines at the same time, maintaining your energy and see what you can truly give. Because sometimes I try to, like, for example, respond to everybody, but I'd be like, bro, I don't have the time, you know? Like I can't do that, and I wouldn't see how I can add value to that. Does that make sense for you? I'm quite transparent in that, and you can't be altruistic if you don't have anything to give, basically, you know?
I agree. And I really like this quote. It's currently my pinned tweet, but it's from The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And she says, or in the book, I don't remember which character is kind of articulating the thought, but basically it says, to say I love you, you must know the I first. And it says like the love of a parasite, or the love of someone who doesn't know themselves, and I'm paraphrasing at this point, is like the love of a parasite, and the love of a parasite is worth nothing. And on below that tweet, I said like selfishness is selflessness ultimately, because like you alluded to, you can only pour when your cup is overflowing. Like it is only from an excess that you can even give to someone else. And even if you were being really self-abandoning, I think we see this in kind of father figures. They'll like give more of themselves than even that they have. And there is that sacrificial love, which is amazing. And they can give it to their wife and their partner and their children for a period of time. But if you drag that out over an entire lifetime, eventually that cup runs entirely dry and they've completely self-abandoned, and it becomes, you know, then you're a parasite again, and you need your cup to be filled, and you start seeking it out in sort of toxic ways.
You know, to tie into that, Zach, like yeah, let's go like into the theme of the mania, the maniacal energy, because this abandon reminds me of that. What I've known, for example, some of these successful people, they have some form of obsession actually, and I wouldn't say it's a toxic energy, but it's very elusive. And if you watch a lot of like fairy tales or fantasy or stuff like that, it's almost like very magical, and it's hard to hold on to. And if you're giving it to a person who's not worthy yet, for example, to extract Excalibur, to put it like that, if they're not worthy yet to hold Excalibur, you can't really give it to them. If you give it to them before they're ready to pull it out of the stone itself, they won't do anything with it. if you give your self-abandoned energy to them, they will abandon themselves. They'll just go along with your ship, with your ride. And that's why I'm so big on archetypal completion or archetypal alignment, in terms of, bro, like, maybe you're not that archetype that I am or that guy is. Maybe you can take inspiration from that it triggers your personality, your archetypal fleshing out. It breaches open certain parts of your shell, like Khalil Gibran would say. It breaks your shell open, maybe, and then you think, oh, maybe I should try that. For example, a lot of people have taken inspiration to go on wild solo trips. This self-abandoned travel mania, to put it like that, or the writing mania that I have now. A lot of people are creating Medium accounts or blogs or whatever. I'm like, okay, maybe, bro, just try it out if it's for you. And like Scott Adams, like, you're going into the systems thinking, you're going to go for the long run, and just try it out. But sometimes, if a person is an embodiment of self-abandon, you can't hold on to it. You'll kind of like, it's like an Icarus, you'll burn yourself. And some people are just not ready for a certain step within that monomyth, but they think they are. And well, it's just trying it out every time.
It's important to demonstrate how ultimately, like, you can't make somebody become anything, really. No one wants to be forced or told to do anything. The best thing that you can do is be emblematic and walk the walk, and then hopefully there will be aspire towards the ideal which you set, which I think is a good analogy for like fatherhood.
Yeah, tying into that, like, who was it? Like Jocko, yeah, lead by example, right? I was a big fan of. He's the reason why I created my Twitter account. See, for example, so he was leading from the echelon front. He made an account. I made an account, and now I made an account, and now other people are making accounts. Very mimetic. It's all I can do, and somebody will take the heat from that. But it wouldn't have worked if I would say, hey, everybody, make accounts, make account. It doesn't work. They have to just see you at the echelon front.
Yeah. And I remember the second thing I was going to say. It reminds me of a quote from the Kabbalion, the three initiates. They say, the lips of wisdom are sealed except the ears of understanding. Similar, like the master will appear when the student is ready. And I think that's so true in all arenas. Like, we can put out good content. And I mean, that's the job, right? We need to pour out from ourselves whatever we are telling our message so that it hits the people that are ready. But, something I've experienced in my personal life is like, I feel like I'm expanding very rapidly in like levels of self-awareness, levels of consciousness, etc. But especially with the people that are very close to me, like family members, like where there's an intrinsic love and they're not at that stage of, call it evolution, development, whatever. It's very painful. And at the beginning, it's like, you want to have all this excess energy and like kind of force feed it, like show them like, this is the way, like you can have so much more. Don't you see? But the truth is, like, you can bash their head against it all day long. It's only going to close their mind more. So it becomes back to like, just be the lighthouse, be the example. And then hopefully through the undeniability of the way you live your life, they will start asking questions and have a genuine internal curiosity, which is the open door that you can then step into.
Yeah, to give the example of like my marathon arc, I don't run as much as anymore as I'd like to. But when I first saw Goggins' video, again, like, he was leading by example. I get quote unquote triggered by that, like a catalyst. And I was kind of like Horace style, trying to rally people, but it didn't work. And so it's fine, but I was taking cold showers, this and that, blah, blah. I was so intense in trying to get people board the ship, but it doesn't work like that, And I learned from that now. So, for example, if people want to go for a run now, I'm all up for that. I just offered to them, but kind of like hands off, nobody wants unsolicited advice, and you on the person on your journey, you learn that as you go. And it circles back to that quote about love. That's a very fickle one, especially if you go from like boy to man. What is love? Because you have different facets of love. You have paternal love, you have fraternal, you have love for a sister, for your community, for your country, for your person. So many different subsets, so many different vocabularies that you have to have within your own central self. And who is I then, and what is love, and who's the you on the opposite side of that? It's a very difficult equation, and it's not that easy. And to say, I almost never, to be honest, I never say it almost, like, because it feels half-hearted or flimsy. Because what does it mean? You can only what I really love these days is like, you know how you vote with your dollar. For example, you love a friend, he's a solopreneurship, he has a brand or something like that. You buy his stuff, you vote with your dollar and saying, "Hey, I'm supporting this," right? You vote with your dollar. And similar, you vote with your action. You know, if you say you love these, you're gonna pick them up at the airport. And the opposite, they're gonna pick you up at the airport. This and this and this, and you don't have to say anything. You're there, and they're like, "Oh, you really meant it," and it's like, "Yeah, I'm there."
I completely agree, and it was whether you said it or not. That's exactly where I was going to go, which is like love is so abstract, and I think we are limited by the semantics of it. Like the words simply just don't do it enough. Plus, the word love is saturated. You even, I don't know if you were conscious right there, but you said like one thing that I love, right? It's just so unconsciously programmed that we're saying it in our vocabulary that the word has lost its meaning, or maybe it didn't have enough meaning, or maybe it's too broad. But love, as we are trying to describe, is ultimately only a felt experience, right? It's the feeling when you look into a woman's eyes, or she like holds you and you feel that release, and you're safe and she's safe and she knows it and you know it. Or you see a sunrise and for whatever reason your eyes start tearing up, but there's no reason, there's no emotionality to it, but you feel that moment. Or you look at a child and see the innocence. Like there's the infinite examples of it throughout life, nature, experience, but they're all felt experiences. And like those are moments of love. But to describe it, the best thing that we can do is just say those metaphors. We can say it's like this, it's like this, it's like this. I think it really does need to be a felt experience to truly like live into love.
You know, and that's why I think that's also to give the late answer. That's why I started reading and writing more for communication, right? How you're gonna explain love, something like that. But I've seen now a certain sunsets or child or that safety that you were describing, and that's how you can communicate it, you know. Or else it would have just stayed here as a felt experience. And if somebody were to ask it now, how would you describe that? You either do that by vocabulary or the written word, you know. And that's how you dent reality, so to say.
I completely agree. And I think that, that has been the best byproduct of having a podcast. It's why I'm excited about the long-term prospect of being in this space is that, I mean, even sans result, like I'm sharpening the skill, like the meta skill of communication, because communication, not only how I communicate with the reality I'm experiencing, like the words I talk to myself in my head, invaluable. How I can talk to future employers, future business partners, future friends, future life partners, my children in the future. Like you have to navigate reality through the meta skill of communication. And this is like the perfect arena to curate that while getting kind of infinite return, because, you and I are having a conscious conversation that's benefiting both of us, even if the recording drops, right? Like there's nothing to be lost, even if we just talk to each other. And on top of that, it's recorded, which means other people get to hear it, which means they can learn from our lessons. So you pick up one turn of phrase from me or a mental model, I pick one up from you. These are just like exponential value adds. And then we get to send it into the universe to be played infinitely at no additional cost per leverage. Like, I don't know, it just feels like almost a surreal medium that has so much disproportionate return that you have to wonder what the karmic like cost of it is, because I'm just getting so much from it. But I think part of why I feel empowered is that I know it's helping other people as well. And, death is a huge kind of thing that I meditate on as a razor for life. Like it's the closer of this podcast. I have it tattooed on my arm, like the concept of memento mori. And it's something that now that I'm in this arena, I feel very assured. Like if this were my last day, if this were my last conversation, like I am satisfied with the way that my life ended and went, because it has helped other people. Like obviously this podcast wouldn't make it on air, but if I were to cut short immediately after this, get hit by a car on my walk, whatever, like it's just over for me. I have close to 50 episodes that are just going to be in the ether forever that people can look back on. I've set an example for my younger brothers. Like I walked the walk, which has kind of that, like you were alluding to, that neural network. It's like the butterfly effect as far as a paradox. Like it's changing one person's life is changing the world, because you have no idea how they'll affect their community, and it just proliferates like no end.
Yeah, I like that. You know, it always consistently because you brought up karma, and the way you were describing it reminds me about the eternal recurrent, the Nietzschean eternal recurring, eternal return. And it's very like to make your singular conscious acts based upon would it return, and would it return eternally down the line in a linear time continuum, that it goes on for eternity, or if it's some kind of loop you don't know in terms of non-linear thought process, then you're going to make the choice over and over again within the M theory, within the string theory. And then would you do what you just did? Would you say what you just did? And it's a very interesting way to live, to be honest.
I agree. I am curious, as someone, I can tell that you think extremely deeply, and I think we're somewhat kindred in that. So I'm curious, as you continue this pursuit of learning and unfolding your own unconscious and just discovering kind of layers of experience. And you've talked, at least on Ryan's podcast, a lot about like the concept of time, whether time is an illusion, time is a lot of this stuff. Like, it's very heady, it's very metaphysical, it's very conceptual. And I think it's fun to play in that arena, like when you have the, intellectual chops to kind of dance in that space. But I am curious how you balance, because this is something I've struggled with, is, the deeper you go, it feels like you're becoming more and more disconnected from the everyman, quote unquote, or like normal people, quote unquote. So I'm curious how you've felt that experience. Has it been somewhat isolating for you? And how do you balance that?
Yeah, I would say, for example, the headiness or the heady concepts, you have to instrumentalize that. You have to make it an instrument, tool, and you have to make it pragmatic. For example, I can give an example. What I just described, I like to leverage for what is known like in peak performance as flow. If you skewer your time perception, for example, you time block, put in like false urgency, don't look at the clock, and do a couple stuff that are flow triggers, you manipulate your notions and concepts of time, and then your output will skyrocket maybe 2 to 3 times. And let's say you're a writer, you can crank out 1,000 words in less than 30 minutes. And if you say that to somebody not accustomed with that, it would sound like an illusion. Like, bro, like 1,000 words, that's gonna take me X amount of time. So in that sense, I try to do that as like protocols, and I try to share that with people if they're willing to listen. And whilst at the same time, that disconnect is getting sometimes heavier. But then, like I said, I also, because of that, like entwined nature, I get to like a form of acceptance that, for example, small talk is necessary. And then I at least try. So it's like how do you say that? It's like, there's a certain tension between that, so that I do more effort. For example, like tying back also, like what I noticed that because of like this extreme, like you're simulating a lot of stuff, to put it like that. You're running thousands of simulations. So you're going nowhere basically, right, in your head. But because of that, you get really like appreciative of very simple things. And then you can see, for example, if small children, little children and animals will suddenly like you. That's like a very esoteric sign, but you've gotten more love for the mundane stuff, and the animals or children, they'll be like, hey, this guy gets it, and then and you didn't really have to do anything. And once you make the conscious approval of that, oh, this kid sees that I can just don't do anything and just zone out and just play with an animal and go to the beach and stuff like that and unwind, you get more appreciative of that. And for me, my personality style, it wasn't possible if I wasn't doing that. So I have to basically almost self-implode, self-destruct, and go the lengths of that self-abandon only to find yourself back in return. It's very Jungian, very Nietzschean, I believe, as well. And yeah, that's how you just grow as a human being in more. But it's a very tough balancing act. But like Nietzsche says, it's a tightrope. It's a straight tightrope over the abyss from here to the Übermensch. It's one straight line, but it's a tightrope over the abyss, and you're gonna have to try.
I agree. I mean, it's not that I think people like yourself, myself, and maybe the people listening, as much as we can conceptualize it, like, I don't think that we have a choice. Like, it is literally, we're stuck with this kind of mental programming, mental framework, mental capacity, regardless. And so it is kind of, you have to choose a perspective to look at it. And I think that Yeah, like choosing that, like, all right, I'm already on the rope. I can't leave the rope, so I might as well try to, balance my way across it and experience it. And I do think it is funny that, like, when stuff gets really extrapolated out, very metaphysical, very heady, it ends up in a very circular way returning to things that are so childlike. We enter the world like just connected to God, nature, love, all of these concepts like very directly. There's no barrier, there's no consciousness, there's no wall, there's no veil. You're part of it. And then, all of the, as Don Miguel Ruiz calls them, agreements come in, and like these barriers, these separation. And then it feels like the rest of our life, as Ram Dass would say, like we're all walking each other home. Like we're trying to get back to that childlike awe, that just wonderment and love. And it does seem to be the only respite for what can be very overwhelming and anxiety inducing and almost like frustrating, is just like return to the moment, like walk outside and feel what the sun feels like to be on your face, the grass beneath your feet, like to be pushed around in the waves in the ocean. Those are the types of things that, for whatever reason, and it does sometimes feel like too simple, like to be the answer, but it does, like if you can dissolve into those moments and be really present with them, it is kind of what I believe like heaven would feel like, or the concept of a heaven and hell could be like.
Yeah, I agree, and I really feel you in that. Like, for example, that's why I'm rereading books. I mentioned Sun Tzu, or Tao Te Ching, or a couple of these books that I read when I was younger. I didn't get it, so I'm rereading that as a miniature, as a microcosm, as a metaphor for returning to stuff, and also ties back to the latter part of the monomyth is the prodigal son comes home. Usually, if you've gone through a big adventure, you kind of come home, and you sometimes even come back physically to the exact same spot, but you yourself are changed. And then because of that, because of the self experience, the place has changed, and it's like, wait, but it's the exact same thing, like the exact same physical thing, but it changed somehow. And that's what that gives me like a sense of like dopamine meaning, or whatever you want to call it. And it ties back to also this thing, I think it's Rumi, and I'm pretty sure Nietzsche read a lot of Rumi, that there's this like big sense, or this sensory, how do you call it, like a sensory experience that is reality or truth. And what is truth, what is reality? We try to break it down with our five senses in terms of sight, hearing, and stuff like that, and we demarcate it. We create these self-induced barriers to fill the neurological gap, actually, to make understanding of what is happening. And actually, the more you've actually lived, the better you'll be perceiving things in a more synesthetic way. For example, you'll be able to pick up music much better, as if you're feeling the chords and you're seeing music with colors, or the voice of a woman changes when you're older, or all these little weird things. I'm like, it was already there. I'm 100% sure it was already there. You're just more accustomed to it, more attuned to it, and that is very life satiating.
It's funny how I feel like the end point of intellectualism ironically becomes art. I think it was Nietzsche that says we have art in order to not die from truth. And it seems like, like, especially just given my personal arc, like I said, when I was very young, always very self-identified with my intellect. Like I was always like combating teachers, trying to like really win these sort of apologetic debates, like trying to prove how smart I was, obviously as a layer of protection for insecurities and stuff. And then even going into university, went to like a very high caliber university, studied a prestigious degree in engineering and all these things. So the intellect is always like a big part of my life. And it seems that now, like as I'm getting older and still continuing to pursue and learn and try to piece together what is truth, what is reality, it seems like the only endpoint is art. Like it is something that is, again, a felt experience, because like the tools that we have around us in science, in even writing, just the words, like they're just not good enough. It has to be felt. And so it's kind of like, I don't know, like leaning through the veil or piercing the veil, or maybe just letting the veil dissolve by ultimate presence.
Yeah, and to make this more concrete for a person, what they can do is if they've ever been to a museum, revisit the same pieces, you know, go back to the same Van Gogh or the same Rembrandt or whatever. Well, these are Dutch masters. Go back to the same Francisco Goya, and it will hit you a little bit different. You know, for example, when I was younger, I didn't really get William H. Turner, but it was last year I went to the National Gallery in London. His pieces really struck me. Whilst I've never been to the ocean on those big battleships or something like that, or Battle of Trafalgar, I have no claim in British naval history or anything like that. But it was just very awe-inspiring and awe-struck. And there's that word like awe, for example, that people love to use for like a sundown, like a sunset at the beach. People don't have a word for it, but it's like this is some form of communion love. This is awe, you know, and just go back to the same art pieces. Or a good litmus test is put on like a classical music. I know some people who get really uh, jarred by classical music because it lets them think about themselves. Actually, it's a reflection or something. So they'll be like, put it off. It's boring. But what's actually happening? They're feeling something that's antsy. They're feeling a shadow or something unresolved. Not per se something dark, but something unresolved. And it's just a mirror. It's a truth that is there for you, your own personal truth. And it's just a fun experience for an experiment for people out there.
Besides writing, which I think is a wildly effective tool for a number of things in the felt experience, but besides writing, what are some of the things that you personally incorporate to help you, I guess, just dissolve into the present, like and that awe state?
Yeah, so tying it back, actually, a thing that I want to mention as well. Metaphysical comes from the ancient Greek, meaning metaphysical, meaning above reality. And that which is physical is usually not reality. It's the Platonic image of the cave and the light that gets shine, and then you get the shadow. Usually, what we see in terms of the physicalities is the shadow outside of the cave. It's something that is an illusion. So once you dip into habits and practices that are more metaphysical, such as writing or picking up spiritual books like the Bible or the Quran or strong poetry, are creating hidden pockets of reality that will make you think. So I like to think in terms of like those kind of habits, like writing, reading. I play chess. I'm not a high elo rank. Sometimes people challenge me. I don't do it for that. I just don't. I do it for stimulation because you have something visual spatial happening and something kinetic. The better you get actually at chess, like Joss Waitzkin, this prodigy calls it, it's very kinetic and very kinesthetic. You'll start to feel, oh wait, I'm losing on this side. I need to push pieces here or something. You cannot really phrase it. For example, if you're a low elo rank, you don't know what's going on, but you know you're losing on this side or that side. It's very kinesthetic, something feeling wise. So that I like to listen to music just for that as well, to like unwind and process and synthesize. And I play music. I play a little bit guitar for that as well, to access those parts of my brain. I should go more for long walks, but I choose that for intent. And well, I have the vagabond habits. Just sit at random cafes. I'm notorious for like solo trips, going to countries by myself, and that's how I learn a lot about myself.
I do think that there is some sort of like microcosmic hero's journey in that, just picking a place you've never been. And a friend I was talking to who travels a lot was kind of phrasing it like, you're going to, even just by being in a new place, like your brain is having to make the same types of connections with a new path, like just whatever it may be, even if it's like, where do I find coffee? But now it's in a new arena. Like those neural networks are you're just connecting in a different way. And I think it's in those moments that you get that quote unquote expansiveness or expansive feeling.
Yeah, in terms of physics, so for the more engineering mind people, like in physics you have the Cartesian 3D realm. So it's like a coordinate axis where a physical object is located. You yourself are a Cartesian object. So if you move yourself in a different pocket of space, you're in a different space. But what tends to happen is a moving body creates a different moving mind. And with momentum, you're literally putting yourself in a different physical space. And what tends to happen, you get a different headspace. And suddenly you can have eureka moments in terms of business, dating, breakthroughs, or issues. And suddenly you have these ideas. And that's why, for example, I walk with a pocketbook, or you can just jot down stuff on your phone. And it's just very, very human in my honest experience, and because some people come from tribes, some people come from nomads, and they always moved around.
What is something that is currently something that you struggle with like on a regular basis? Like what is currently like the biggest thing that's challenging you?
I would say, well, I live in the West, so a little bit tied to that theme, what you said, that struck me really close to the heart about a form of disassociation. It's not something schizo. I know what reality is, but a disassociation with certain societal and political upheavals that it's not always about that it's not safe. Sometimes it feels unsafe, but it's more a disturbance, a disturbance in the force. That is something that I'm thinking long term, like what am I gonna do about it? Because I'm not on the top of elite that I'm gonna create cities or governments and stuff like that. So I'm just thinking about that in terms of what I'm gonna do with that in like a 4D chess move or like a campaign, or that's something that's on my headspace right now.
Interesting. Do you have an inkling of what that direction is going to lead you?
Yeah, for example, what was a big theme the last couple of years in our corner, our space, was like people who build communities, build compounds, and go to these it's not about tax havens, but it's about communities and those compounds and those clans and finding your kindred spirits and your tribes and stuff like that. So I do make a conscious effort. For example, I just did a trip like to Morocco with my friends. I do make a conscious effort to, it's not, well, you could call it propaganda, but to profilate that you're gonna have to click up with somebody. No man is an island, and my own hubris has overtook me in the past. So I'm trying to backtrack on that. So even in like the smallest gestures, like a friend of mine, I hadn't seen him almost in a full year, but allegedly this is one of my best friends, right? And like I said, you vote with your actions. So I try to keep him on my team because he has a very like strong Arthurian like Alexander energy, and he can maybe make a strong societal change because not only does he have charm, charisma, he's good looking, but he's smart. And so I try to do that with my talents, like as a Merlin archetype. I try to get the tribe a little bit going how I can, because I'm getting a little bit older as well. And I just try to share that sagacity, like that experience and maturity for the young guns. And some people are truly talented, and if they take heed from that, that is a blessing enough.
I love that. It's very inspirational, I think, to and I talk about this a lot on the podcast. Like we do seem to be in sort of, and people like lean maybe too heavily into the trope, but like some sort of spiritual war. And it does feel like there's a good team and a bad team. And I want to engender and facilitate as many of the quote unquote good guys winning as possible, like so that we have these emblems and people to look up to. Cause like I think we're in a culture currently that's just devoid of proper role models. I think like everyone's looking for, I think you and Ryan talked about this, but like their proverbial like daddy, like they're looking for a father figure. And so it allows the rise of like a Tate or these like Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, these guys that get like meteoric rises because they're talking about things that people know to be true intrinsically, but nobody said it and made them feel seen until now. And I think we need more people winning, but by the book, like with morality, not just tapping into extremely lucrative models that are somewhat exploitive, but saying like, no, I actually help people top to bottom in a good way. I'm not trying to exploit people. And I did it the right way the whole way from the beginning to the end. It's all documented. It's very clear. And here's the framework that I use to get there. Take from it what you want. And I just want so many of those examples out there so that people have people to look to.
Like thematically, it's also interesting in terms of a return. There was an account that I think he was Anon, but I think he doxed himself or something in the past. But he just disappeared. But he was like an American-born Chinese, and he had the similar, like the struggles that I had and stuff like that. And it's because of people like them and a couple like Asian friends that I have as well, that I try to form a bond more with them, because I don't tend to make Asian friends because of my nature or something. So I have, that's more like a recurring self pattern that I have as well. But I try to make a conscious effort. That's why which account is going to talk about Tao Te Ching and like Sun Tzu? Who's going to do that? So I try to make an effort with that, for example, as an example, because I do see, like, I call them statue accounts talking about Tao Te Ching, or Bruce Lee's Asian as well, but they become they become a meme. So it doesn't hold anything of substance. It's very on the surface level, and it doesn't mean anything. So that is a conscious effort as well, like in terms of like roots, and like in terms of lead by example. I do say, well, I've come to the realization, you have to stick to a root. It doesn't have to be, so it depends on what kind of root it has, but it's the opposite of being uprooted. And I see, so we were talking about bad teams and good teams. I do see the bad teams are uprooted in terms of a religion, some form of belief system, belief sets, or some people are very patriotic, or they love their city so much, and I'll be like, hey, this is interesting, keep doing that. For example, I think it was, like 1 full year ago, I had a friend from Texas. He came all the way to the Netherlands, and I said, well, bro, if you love Texas so much, just push that forward, become a Texan emblem. Because where I'm from, people have never met a guy from Texas, they're like, what is that? It's just like rednecks or Yankees. What is that? They need to know that there's a good team in Texas, and you can be an emblem of that. And I'm not sure how much I inspired him, but I'm at least sure that would be a better team than something that is uprooted.
Yeah, there, like, we kind of, I think it was at the very beginning of this conversation, we were talking about how everything's kind of subverted and inverted now, and everything is divorced from everything, really. And when everything is just floating in a non-Cartesian sense, there's no groundedness. And I think the human spirit, as much as it does crave meaning, it requires grounding. It requires some sort of tether to something. And we are intrinsically tribal. So sometimes that's other people, but sometimes it's just, I am from this place. And we see it in kind of sports teams, like people cling like wildly loyally to these teams and these organizations and colors, and they paint their faces and scream the names. Like, why? Like, what about that is appealing? And I think it speaks to the underlying principle that they need something. And it's something that I want to incorporate into when I start my family, is like build out a family, like a true family history. Like, my family name comes from somewhere. I'm fortunate enough to know the city that it was originally from, way back in Germany. I want to imbue the name of like our family's last name. Like, what does it mean? But what does it mean to us? We have a family crest that's still preserved from that old family. But like, to me, it was given no meaning. But having that crest in a book that says, like, this is our family constitution, this is our family manifesto, these are the values, just giving a framework for the kids to enter the world and be like, what does it mean to be a Schenken? Like, what does that mean to them and to us? And what is the standard that they have to, strive towards? And whether they're fully actualized people, they'll go and do whatever they want out of life, but giving them that as a root, like family, I think is a great unit for that. And for those that don't have that strength of family, like, there's no one saying you can't start it now for you and your branch of your family. And a great way to look is to say, like, well, where do I come from? Where does my family come from? Is it a region? Is it a country? Is it a place? Is it a state? Pick the place to plant a flag in the soil and like make a bit of a stand.
And it's really interesting. Like, there's this name, there's this esoteric thing that's like name physiognomy, and schenken in Germanic roots means to gift. It's a full infinitive, like a verb, to gift. So what you're doing in terms of name physiognomy, you're being the emblem of giving people like a gift, the gift of your presence, your vocal presence, and it's good, man.
It's absolutely surreal that you, first of all, know that. Many people don't, but it's funny you say that. A few episodes back, I was kind of alluding to like a new direction for the podcast, rebrand. I had wrote the manifesto for the Vitruvian as a company, all these things. And in that podcast, I talked about the name, and I had always said, so my name is Zachary, And I always thought it was just kind of like a normal white kid name, like Zach. It's not very cool. It's not like Alexander or some of these great characters. So I was always kind of like, it's whatever. It's kind of a frat boy name. But I heard a clip from Naval, and he said, it's interesting how there's a kind of a phenomena that people live up to their name, like name physiognomy, like you're talking about. And so I was like, that's interesting. I had forgotten, like, what does Zach even mean? Like, what does Zachary mean? And Zachary, from like the biblical roots, means that God has remembered, the Lord has remembered. And then my last name is to give a gift, or to give. And yeah, the nature of my work is that. Like, it is, we'll get to the closer questions here in a second, but like asking and helping people facilitate their gift. I really do feel like that is my Achilles advantage, is helping people see the most of themselves. It's been something that I've done for my whole life, non-professionally, where like, motivating people, getting myself into leadership positions, and helping people, whether it's an organization or on an individual basis, just see the most that they're capable of. Like, really, I don't know. A lot of times I think we need that mirror, right? Because we have our own falsified beliefs about ourselves, our insecurities. But when I look at you, I don't know your internal state. I don't know your insecurities. I don't know your background. So I just say like, holy shit, dude, you're so articulate. You make all these connections, blah, blah, blah. And so sometimes you just need that mirror. Like you said, the push. Sometimes people just need to hear it from outside themselves that they are meant for something great, and to be told what their thing is. And it's not like they don't know it, but it's that they've either forgotten it, or they're pushing it to the side, or they're underwriting it. And so, yeah, it does feel like I'm on, and the more I lean into it, like this divinely guided path. And so, yeah, it's very, very surreal. And the name physiognomy thing, it just is, it's like these recurring reminders that like you are on the path, like this is ordained, it's going to work, continue to lean into it.
Yeah, it's good. It's like syncs are like the signs of God. Usually when you get free food, or random people give you stuff, or suddenly a girl just gives you a number, really like weird stuff that comes out of nowhere, means like paths are being forged for you, like reality transurfing, switching of the tracks, kind of. You're going on the right track, on the proper track, and things just start to happen. And also a little thing like that I want to share for, there are people who are always like Achilles lover, and he's the main character of the Iliad. And what struck me when I was going through that, I'm not done, but I was analyzing it, for, how do you say, like a modern person, it's kind of like boring how much, so they go into a battle, and before they whip out their spears and stuff like that, so a modern guy would be like, yo, just start throwing your spears, I don't care. But what they do is, I am Diomedes, I'm from this region, my father is this person, I come from this kingdom, I'm protecting this and this person, who are you? Before I even like whip out my weapon, I don't care if you're nobody. And then the other person says, who do you think you are? I'm from Troy, this is my father, blah blah, this and this. And it happens even that Diomedes, he was the second Achilles, by the way, he meets another warrior who by accident their grandfathers ever met. He's like, oh, but your grandfather at one time stayed at my palace, this and this and that. I won't kill you, but here, let's trade armors or something like that. And it was something very, nostalgia means usually like that I've lived it, but it felt very nostalgic in the sense that, wait a second, these people's name meant something. Their place of origin meant something. They weren't just butchering each other, and they were in a war, and there was some kind of nobility, some kind of code. And it all meant something in terms of substance, in terms of ethos, which means character in Greek. And it all has to do with thinking a little bit more in terms of ethics and ethicism instead of just aestheticism, how things are just cool and shining armor and stuff like that. And a lot of things has to do with understanding, your roots, and just simple stuff like your name. And like an effort goes a very long way, So if people love Achilles and love the Iliad, check it out. You'll see that it's not about just random people butchering each other. It's about people who had a name, who stood for something, and that's why they were doing these kinds of stuff. That's why they were performing these great acts. That's why Homer wrote about them.
I love it. Well, Fury, I think we could go on and on and on, and I am excited about what the future of connecting with you looks like, whether it's podcast 2, 3, 4 down the line, but even just being somewhat kindred spirits. I really do appreciate your time, but I have 3 closer questions that I like to ask every guest on this podcast. So the first of the 3 is, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself and tell him one thing, what would it be?
Yeah, so this one I get asked a lot. So in terms of like the iterative feedback loop mechanisms, or like the habits that I do, that so an iteration, like in terms of like physics, and like if people from a STEM background, you do a loop. So if I had the opportunity, I would tell myself, actually, like, make faster feedback loops, do something, fail, but get the data, really get it back fast, so you get something to chew on. So it doesn't matter, just fail more, don't die, and just mature faster. Because make no mistake about it, Alexander did conquer the known world when he was 22, but it was only because of all his resources, but because he had faster feedback loops. And all my younger friends, I say, just finish your degree, just get it over with, get a job. It doesn't matter that you're doing a 9, it doesn't matter, just finish it fast, so you breach the pocket of reality faster, and then you get to know yourself faster, and then you actually get what you wanted. You get your spouse faster, you get your job faster, you get broke faster, or whatever happens, it comes faster.
I love that. And then secondarily, obviously, you're a well-read man. I'm a huge quote person, so I'm curious, what is one quote that has always stuck with you, or that you try to live by?
I'm not sure if I'm living by it, but I do return to this quote by Marcus Aurelius. I'm not a big Stoicism fan per se, but I do adhere to the main tenet, control what you can control, let go of what you can't, and know the difference between the two, which is in Alcohol Anonymous as well, the Serenity Prayer. But within the meditations, there's a quote that doesn't get put out a lot, actually, but it's about, so I'm paraphrasing, it's like, be the greatest athlete in the greatest contest of all, which is life. And so I'm not the best athlete, I'm not a great footballer, MMA, striking, whatever, but I do try to compete within the contest that is life. And I ascribe to that, I aspire towards like competing as an athlete within that. And that's where I try to earn my medal and medals.
I love that. And then finally, what do you believe is your unique gift to give the world?
I've been thinking a lot about that, and I boil it kind of down to, how Goggins always says, like, I'll let you do you, because I'm gonna damn sure do me. And I think over the tenure of, for example, this account and whatever, but just in my life, I did a lot of like me, so I'm gonna do me. And I think because of that, some people, not a lot, in a very cultish way, a lot of people are gonna do them.
I love that. Well, Fury, it has been excellent. I appreciate your time. I want to shout out anyone that's made it thus far in the podcast. I love the people that make it to the end. I know that there's been value top to bottom. Let the people know where they can find you and what you're working on.
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter, formerly known Twitter, X, at HOOAFury. HOOA, you spell HOOA, Fury. It's the same account on like Instagram. They'll find me from there. They can get all my other stuff like newsletters, stuff like that. And yeah, I'm working on like what I said earlier, the service with writing. I'm gonna do like more like clan stuff, get people together, because I see a lot of people it's like a retreat what they do, but I'm gonna make it more like a clan style. Like I see some people further ahead in the high ticket stuff that they do these kinds of stuff, but I feel that I can bring them on like a HOOA mission, and truly bring them on like these skirmishes, and like make them understand who they truly are in the full capacity in wherever land we go towards.
Then for anyone that's made it this far and you're curious, maybe you come from Fury's audience, appreciate you taking the time. If you want to follow along more of this, you've obviously found it on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, which you can continue listening on. You can follow myself at ZDSCHENKEN on Instagram and Twitter, or X now. But I appreciate you guys taking your time and spending your attention with myself and Fury today. They are your most valuable resources. Memento Mori, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Vitruvian podcast.
And if he fails, at least fails while daring greater, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.